Hi, everyone. My name's Mary Robinette Kowal, for those of you who have somehow wandered in without knowing who I am. And we're here doing an AMA and Ask Me Anything about the book Calculating Stars, or really anything in the Lady Astronaut series, or any questions that you have. So I am ready to take your questions. Okay, first one. Victoria, I would love to hear all about Space Camp. Oh my goodness. Okay, Space Camp was amazing. So we took some people who backed the Kickstarter to Space Camp, and because they charge a flat fee to me, I had some spaces left over, and so I opened it up to friends and family, which meant that I was at Space Camp with my dad and a friend that I have known since I was in seventh grade, and a whole bunch of people in between. It was amazing. So they start us off with the first night after the orientation, we did the multi-axis trainer. And I have learned that this is my second time on the multi-axis trainer. It's like being in the middle of a gyroscope. And I have learned that I laugh the entire time I'm in it. Interestingly, historically, when they were all of the astronauts had to train in a version of this that had control so that they could try to bring themselves out of an uncontrolled spin. So they could learn how to do that. This was a skill that Neil Armstrong actually used with the Agena when there was a thruster that was misfiring and they were in an uncontrolled spin, and he was able to correct and stop for it. Neil's the only guy who was any good at that. But among the Artemis, not the Artemis, the Lady Astronauts, the flats, first Lady Astronaut trainees, as they called themselves, Mercury 13, several of them could pull themselves out of a spin, more than the men. So that was a fascinating thing. After the multi-axis trainer, the next day we built rockets. We also got to play with the lunar chair, the 1/16th chair. That was fun and frustrating simultaneously because it's a rigid frame that you're strapped in. And I know from watching videos that the way the Apollo astronauts moved was that you tip your weight really far forward to make up for the fact that you don't have a lot of friction and traction to with your feet. And so you could not do a weight shift. But the cool thing was after you did that, then you came out of the chair and they said, jump on the ground just normally. And you felt so heavy and underpowered. It was ridiculous. It was really fascinating how quickly the brain recalibrated to, oh yeah, no, that's normal. That's right. Thank you, Marie. Marie has advertised for me. If you're a writer and you'd like to attend more Q&As with Mary Robinette, she hosts a regular one through her Patreon. Patreon.com/Mary Robinette. It's true. How are you feeling given everything? I have been having an inadvertent distraction. I'm in Chattanooga because a family member had a medical emergency. And so much better now, but not all the way well. But was unexpected. Oh, hello, I'm in Chattanooga now. It's been a distraction. So I'm tonight while visiting, the news was on, and we were both like, this is terrible, and turned it off. It's really bad. Your monthly roundup emails have a new crochet project each week. Are you really crocheting a garment each month? Sometimes it is, yes, ish. I usually have more than one project on the hook at any given time. So like I have 3 different projects going right now. So the chances of me finishing a project in any month, even if it is like a multi-month project, that's fairly good. So this is, here, I'm gonna show off. This is one of the ones that I just made. I don't think I've put this one in the newsletter yet. So this is from Linda Linda Scuya's crochet garments or crocheted garments with a textured twist. I can't remember. Anyway, but it is yarn that I picked up in France because one of my gifts hacks to myself is when I travel, now I buy yarn from a region. I try to start the garment there. And I go like with a pattern that I'm planning on making. Did Elma and Nathaniel always start as a couple in your different versions of the story? I can see a world in which the book had more of a romance plot. There are quite a few sex scenes. Curious how you thought about those from a pacing structure perspective. So the Calculating Stars is not the first thing that I wrote in this universe. The first thing that I wrote was a short story called Rockets Red, and I described it as my punch card punk, and it does not have Elma and Nathaniel. Then I was asked to write something for an anthology called Rip Off, in which we all started with a famous first line, and we got to pick our own first lines. And I picked the opening line of Wizard of Oz. And that was the first time that I wrote Elma. It takes place when Elma and Nathaniel are in their 60s and happily married couple. It's one of the commitments that I have with them, is that they are always a happily married couple, even when they have disagreements. And it won a Hugo Award. It's called The Lady Astronaut of Mars. And my editor said, "How do you feel about making a novel?" The short story I didn't think was not something that I was interested in exploring in novel form, but the backstory of the meteor and how Elma became known as the Lady Astronaut of Mars, that I was very interested in. So then I had to sit down and figure out where in the timeline I was going to start, and decided to start, with the arrival of the meteor. But from a logistics thing, from a pacing structure perspective, when I'm dealing with a couple that is committed, whether it's a pair of friends or a romantic pairing, I think of the relationship as a character, and that character, the character of the relationship, is going to go through an arc where it is having some, it is trying to figure out what it is. And yeah, come on up. And so for them, it was learning how to navigate Elma taking on this whole new career. They knew what their lives looked like when they both worked in the same department, and she was a computer and mathematician, and he was an engineer. They knew what that looked like, but how their lives reshaped as she ventured out of her own shell and into the world. That was a lot of what I was thinking about from a pacing and structure point as far as their relationship. As a Jewish person who loves science fiction and feels well represented by your books, I'd love more Jewish sci-fi recommendations. I know because I just saw someone in the chat, Rachel, if you wouldn't mind throwing some recommendations in there, because I think you're more tapped in on that than I am for sure. One of the people that I really love as a writer, it's not science fiction, but it is fantasy, and has it's set also in the same time period, the 1950s. It's called When Franny Stands Up by Eden Robbins. It's wonderful. And it's dealing with some of the same themes because it's set in the same time period, but it's not even remotely space-based. Basically, she wants to be a stand-up comedian, and in this world, there's a magical thing that happens when women are doing comedy. And there's the running thing is that men just are not good at comedy. It's really great. It deals with a lot of the intergenerational trauma, but also the figuring out who you are and how to unpack your own self. So that one's a fantastic one. Okay, so the second part of that question was, also, do you feel like you could have told this story without Jewish characters, or no? This is an interesting question. I think that I could have made different choices. And still told the story of someone trying to go to the moon, but I think it would have been such a different story. specifically Elma's journey and her relationship with her faith. I don't think that would have played at all in the same ways if she was Protestant. Because one of the things for me that happens structurally that I would, that would go away is the oppression that and the fact that she has to make a choice about whether or not to let people know that she's Jewish. So how much masking she's doing in any given moment, that would have all gone away. And I think it's an important part of the novel that I wrote. I think I could have written a novel but it would have been a different novel. It would have been dealing with different things. Are there any words you wish you hadn't added to Elsie's board? Not really. I did recently re-record or change. She started using Guppy's board, my dog. So for people who are not familiar with this, Elsie and Guppy use buttons to communicate with us. Elsie has 125 words on her button board. Guppy has 10. Guppy is pretty well convinced that every button means outside or friend. But Elsie has begun using Guppy's board, and it had the word potty on it, and Elsie would just camp on it, and it's really annoying. And I realized that she, in particular, and then Guppy began doing it this also, were using the word to mean more hurry instead of I have to go outside and poop. Elsie, for good reason, didn't know that that's what the word meant, because the only time the modeling that she saw of it was Guppy saying, outside, outside, outside. I'm like, no, outside later. And then Guppy would say potty. I'm like, okay, I guess we go. So it makes sense that Elsie would have learned it as hurry, or I'm serious, or let's go do this thing. So I've recently changed it to hurry, which is only a little better to having her behind you going, hurry, hurry, hurry. Any words or concepts you'd like Elsie to be able to communicate with you? Yeah, the one that there's an expansion that I want to do, but it requires a lot of homework for both of us before we do it. I want to give her words for smell, for different smells, because when you think about the cat's Umwelt, the way they perceive the world, it is much more, it's very scent oriented. Cats actually don't have particularly good vision. So like I know when I come inside that she spends a lot of time sniffing me and smelling things. When something new comes into her environment, she smells it a lot. And so I have this idea that I'm going to get something like a sommelier kit, so that we have, so that I can model, pear or whatever, but model words so that we both agree this word goes with this scent profile, and then give her those buttons so that when I'm like, what do you smell? That she can tell me, because I would find that very interesting. I'm asking her to talk about the world in my terms using words and language. And I would love for her to be able to tell me about her world and how she perceives it. And we have a demonstration of the differences in the way we perceive the world right now, because she loves boxing glass. Oh, hi, Elsie. You said Brandon Sanderson talked you through plot problems and that Stetson Parker's existence is directly his fault. How so? So one of the things that we often do with writing excuses is that when one of us is working on a story, because particularly when I was working on this, oh no, that's also a bad idea because you will knock the light over. In that era of writing excuses, I was flying to Utah about 3 times a year. So you check in with people over the course of, whatever their project was. And I was having some problems as I was working on it. And I remember like just brainstorming and talking, and Brandon suggested that I should have kind of an external manifestation of the misogyny that Elma was facing. That it be a singular figure that she encounters more than once, and that I introduce him early on, because I knew that I wanted Parker in the latter parts of the story. But Brandon was like, you need to get him on stage as fast as you can. And it was like, you are 100% correct. So that is why Parker is there. There was someone else who was going to be in those scenes. Do I outline before I write, and how extensively? It depends on the book. So I used to outline very extensively because plot and structure was my weakest point. As I've moved through my career, I've been working on letting inspiration strike more. So Calculating Stars, I had outlined it, and it was originally going to be one book. Calculating Stars, Faded Sky was originally one book, but there were big chunks of it that I kind of discovered as I was going, and then also scenes that I just never used. So the way I tend to think about outlining now is that it's like, I have mixed metaphors on this one. It is it's a document that is designed to hold the parts of the story that I can't hold in my brain. So some stories I can hold most of it in my brain, so I don't need to write very much down. Others are more complicated, I can't hold at all, or I have a lot of external things that are going on. So my brain is being spent in other ways, and so I have to outline more thoroughly. So that's thing one. Thing two is I also think about it as a conversation with my past self, because the outline represents the things that I'm interested in when I write it down. But you're always becoming a different person as you move through your life. So when you're writing, it's very common for you to get into the book and be like halfway through, three-quarters, and you've got a different idea. And that's because you're a different person than you were a couple of months ago. And then the kind of third thing that I've got is that I think of it like a roadmap. So when I'm, again, driving familiar territory, I don't need to pull up a map. But if I'm going somewhere unfamiliar, I need a map. And one of the things that it can help me do is to gauge whether or not a side trip is going to be worth it. Because some side trips, it's like, if you have to get gas anyway, you may as well stop at the world's largest ball of twine, if it's just right off the interstate. But if the world's largest ball of twine is 100 miles off the interstate, and you don't need to, like, that's, even if you need to get gas, that's not worth it. You're going to pass like 15 gas stations on the way there. And it's twine. So those for me are like the side quests and things on the novel, and the outline can help me measure whether or not one of those things is worth it, and still allow me to get where I'm going. Sometimes I change my destination, mind you. Okay, so obviously neurodiversity was handled very differently in the 1960s, but as a person in engineering now, I guess most of the people I work with are neurodiverse in some way. Are any Lady Astronaut characters neurodiverse, and do you think you'll address that at all in the books, or have you already and I missed it? Interesting thing about the 1960s, 50s and 60s was that Miltown, which is the drug that Elma takes for her anxiety, is a real drug. And at that time, it was so common and so popular that there were literally signs that said, "We have ice cream and Miltown," like metal signs that people were shipping across the country. It was hugely popular. It was Mother's Little Helper was one of its other names, and everybody was on it. There's a great book called The Age of Anxiety that talks about this. So there's obviously Elma's anxiety. I have come to the realization that all of the characters, the main characters that I write, are ADHD, because when I was recently trying to write a character that was deliberately ADHD, I'm like, how do I do this? And realized, oh, you're already doing it because you're ADHD. Okay. But Myrtle has OCD. Nathaniel he's very, very work driven. So I guess part of the reason I'm hesitating here is that I often think of the idea of neurotypical as like saying the average man. Like I don't think neurotypical actually exists. So it's like, yeah, all of them are. I mean, Parker has depression, which he has always had even before events. But I don't have any plans to write a story addressing that. No, sorry, this is just me going through a catalog in my brain going, do you? What? No. But part of it also is that what I want in these books is just for people who have stuff going on to still be able to have adventures without whatever is going on in their brain being something that causes them to be opted out of stories that, or that it's something that they have to deal with. It's like, no, that just, she has anxiety. Does she have to deal with it? Yeah, but, she doesn't solve it. It's not cured. She has anxiety through the whole series. When did you decide to write a second Lady Astronaut book? While I was writing the first one. So my original concept for The Calculating Stars was that since it had begun with The Lady Astronaut of Mars, which is a novelette, that what I was going to do was write 3 connected novelettes about 3 points in Elma's life related to spaceflight. And so part 1 is pretty much what I had envisioned as the first novelette. Part 2 is what I had been thinking about for the second novelette plus material. And then part 3 is The Faded Sky. And so The Faded Sky was supposed to be the third part of this. And I had begun writing part 3 and it felt awful. Like it was right what I was supposed to be doing according to my outline, but I kept stalling out and spinning and rewriting things, which is usually a sign to me that there's something about it that I don't believe that there's a problem. What I finally realized was that because part 2 ends with Elma going to the moon, and part 3 begins with her preparing for Mars, that having those happen in the same book, that readers were going to feel cheated that I had skipped all of the moon stuff. Because I wasn't going to show the moon landing, because I was saving that for like that moment of we've landed someplace else. I was saving that. I wanted to use it in the third part, and I didn't want to have those beats repeat. But when you're when you go from book 1 to book 2, that larger break, people are more accepting of stuff happening in between. It doesn't feel like you're being cheated in the same way. So I contacted my editor and I said, I think structurally I need to split this into 2 books. And then once I did that, that gave me room to unpack and expand a lot of things that I was also going to have to skip just for length. So that was when I realized that. And then when we realized that there was going to be more books was when Calculating Stars basically took off. I was at Worldcon and we'd had a launch party there, and the book had just come out, so I guess 2018. And my editor sat down from the table across from me and said, so when can we have another Lady Astronaut book? And I'm like, well, I have 4 ideas already. Because I do tend to like have ideas that I probably will not write, but just like, oh, this is gonna, like this thing happens over here, this thing happens over there. Sometimes I'm thinking about a character's trajectory, even if I don't actually show it on the page and have no plans to. Sometimes I still sort of know a thing about them. One of the examples is unfortunately in Faded Sky, so ask me that at the next AMA. But that's basically when I realized that there would be multiple books. Okay, I'm scrolling past all of the great suggestions for, actually, I'm just going to say these out loud so that they are on the recording. Other Jewish fantasy or science fiction, Gollum and the Genie by Helena Wecker. It's great. two Jewish fantasy novels, The Pomegranate Gate, which is secondary world fantasy with where the magic stuff is all Jewish mythology stuff. The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, either set during the Inquisition or a secondary world that's based on it. Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, the novel version, yeah. And then if you like short fiction, there's an anthology called Jewish Futures. And then the person putting this list together has also published some science fiction Jewish stuff. That's Rachel Guten. And you will I don't think Rachel is in book one, but does turn up in later books. Did you ever fall out of love or doubt with any of the books in this series during initial drafts? And if so, how did you fall back in love with your story? Just Martian Contingency. Part of the thing that was happening as I was working on Martian Contingency was, frankly, I was writing it during what we have begun to call, or have been calling, the Year of Five Deaths. Someone was dying every 1 to 2 months, and my mom was one of those. So that combined with other things, writing in general was very hard. I was having a really hard time figuring out what the novel was, because what I wanted, because everything was so yucky, what I wanted was just to write a cozy. But knowing that it was going to come after The Relentless Moon, and The Relentless Moon is really a thriller, the tension drop, it would have been so great that even if it was a great cozy, it would not have been, it would have, like, that arc was not going to work as a series arc. So it took me a long time to figure out how to get traction on it in a way that I could do what I wanted to do, while also, while also bearing in mind where that book stood. That's the only one, and really it was just a lot of noodling and breaking things into smaller and smaller pieces so that I could handle them. Lots of walks. And then figuring out what it was that I wanted to do. And once I figured it out, then the story moved. So I know there has been mention of reference to some characters being part of the LGBTQIA plus community. Will there ever be more overt acknowledgments of this in future books? Will this version of reality experience its own gay rights push equivalent to the Stonewall riots? I think that I refer to the Stonewall riots in one of the news articles. I know that I had, but I cannot remember if that was in a draft or if that's in a final. So I know that they do happen. Will there be a more overt acknowledgement of this in future books? Yes. Am I going to talk about it at all right now? No, because spoilers. But definitely, there's definitely a more overt acknowledgement. And then there's a short story. A lot of times what I wind up doing is I write short stories so that I can bring things onto the page that would otherwise be difficult. So let me explain that the problem isn't, oh, it's going to be hard to have a gay character in the story. That's not the problem. The problem is that I want characters who are gay and trans and non-binary and every shade under the umbrella. I want everybody there. But Elma is still a 1952 housewife. And so I don't want that to be a plot point, because if it's a plot point, then it's a thing that has to be solved. And I don't think that LGBTQ plus folks are people who have to be solved. I think they should just be allowed to have adventures. So what I've attempted to do is to cue people that the characters are there, and then I write side stories in which I can be more overt about it. But because these are written in first person, if Elma is aware of it, let me rephrase. If Elma was aware of it here, I absolutely would have had to follow through. Parker is bi, which is like, that's nowhere. You can, like, if you're looking for it, it's there. But but it's not a thing that is gonna hit the page. Tarazis is gay. That becomes more clearer in, that is a spoiler, but who cares? That becomes clearer in the second book. But in the first one, my narrator was not in a position where I could do that, so I do other stories. In the Moon's House, which is available on Tor.com, you get to see. I think there's a lot of gayness. I'll just say that. What was the term you used to describe Elsie's smellscape? Umwelt. Yes. It's German. It's all these things. It's German. Umwelt is the idea that the worldview that a creature experiences. So humans, our Umwelt tends to be very visually oriented. We have really well developed visual organ. Other creatures have a different sensory input, including the range of sight that they see. So did you already have contacts in the NASA community before you started this book? Or did you have to scramble to build those connections as you began the work? I did not. I mean, I knew a couple of people, kind of loosely, but I really, actually, did I even know? I knew a couple of people who worked for NASA, but nobody who was working in crewed spaceflight. So the way it worked is, what happened was I put out a feeler online and said, I'm writing this book. I really want to talk to someone who's either a woman astronaut or a woman pilot. Does anybody know anyone? And I was working on the book, but I was on tour with Ghost Talkers. So this would have been 2016. I know that because Ghost Talkers tour started on election day of 2016. Please buy that book. No one, it got very overlooked for reasons. Anyway, one of my friends, Stacy Berg, who's a wonderful science fiction writer, also Jewish. Actually, her novel, oh, what is the name of her novel? It's great. I cannot remember the name of the novel. It is quietly Jewish, because it's a post-apocalyptic thing. But anyway, Stacy was like, "Oh, I'm friends with Katie Coleman, who's an astronaut. I see you're going to be in Houston. Do you want to meet her?" And I was like, "Yes." So I met up with Katie. Katie was great. And then by coincidence, Kjell Lindgren was Toastmaster at the Nebula Awards that year. And I was running programming. And so we met, and he asked the question every author dreads, which is, what are you working on? And I said, well, I'm writing an Apollo era science fiction novel. And he said, Apollo era science fiction, I would like to read that. And I'm like, I would like for you to read that. And then people are like really generous. What I have learned subsequently is that if you write to NASA's public affairs officer, chances are that they won't always be able to get you like, hours with an astronaut, but they can help you make connections. That's kind of part of their job. And the other thing that I found is that people in aerospace tend to love, they're in it because they are passionate about space, and so they're happy to talk about it. And then it's been lots of people introducing me to other people from there. I will say that I had hired Stephen Grenade, who's in the acknowledgements. He's also a science fiction writer, but he was a rocket scientist. And so I hired him to be my science consultant before I started writing the books. So he and I talked through things all the way through. That was invaluable. As you mentioned, you have ADHD. Do you mind sharing when you found out and were diagnosed? Curious, as women tend to get diagnosed later than men. So some of it is that the signs are different. And one of the other things that I have learned is this is not true for everyone, but a significant number of women who have ADHD don't realize it until they hit perimenopause. And one of the side effects of perimenopause is that your executive function crashes and burns. And so a lot of people who had built coping mechanisms around the fact that they have ADHD suddenly find all of them just go away completely. So I was 50 and I had been starting to have thoughts about it because I was watching the way other people were talking about ADHD on social media and was having uncomfortable, like, this feels very familiar. So I went into my primary care doctor and said, can you arrange for me to get tested for ADHD? And she said, well, why do you think you have it? And I said, well, I've been reading this stuff about, no, I should probably back up. There was this Twitter thread, and as the person was describing what, so it's a whole combination of things. I was also talking to this friend, and she's like, I'm just going to stop you right now and write your prescription. You could not finish a sentence. You started 5 of them, and you couldn't finish any of them. Yes. So, so that was my experience, which was so much easier than I know happens for a lot of people. But apparently, demonstrating it was very compelling. Let's see. Oh, Yiddish Policemen's Union, another good. Let's see. Pete Hamill's Snow in August is like forever his most popular novel, sort of fantasy, but not really the way we characterize science fiction and fantasy, and it has a golem. What is the short story that's currently available in the Lady Astronaut universe? I have on my website an FAQ for the Lady Astronaut series that has a list of all of the stories and the order in the order where they happen chronologically. They are all over the place right now. The Kickstarter will have them all in one collection. It's very funny because I have been having this urge to write stories because I've just been dealing with Lady Astronaut stuff, to write some stories that are not going in there's the stories that I'm writing, the new stories that I'm writing for the anthology, but then I'm like, oh, but there'd also be this other one I'm doing. I'm like, but then there's stories that aren't in the anthology, they're the collection. So what are the stories? I don't know. I don't know the names of my own stories. I will tell you that if you do go read not Rockets Red, which is one of the stories, We Interrupt This Broadcast. I said Rockets Red earlier. We Interrupt This Broadcast is the first story. If you read it, no one in the novels will know about the events in that except for the people in that story. The author I mentioned that introduced me to Katie Coleman is Stacy Berg, Berg. But you said you hired a science consultant, so these people are actually paid. So it depends. I cannot pay the astronauts because of federal employees and blah, blah, blah. So it depends on how much information they're gonna, like how much I'm gonna be leaning on them. Often often all I need is like a 1 hour conversation, and then maybe circling back with, can you read this scene, or can you add this jargon? So sometimes I give a small honorarium for that. If someone is going to be like reading the entire book, which Stephen did, I pay them, and it depends on the person. Some people take a flat fee, some people it's a per page, some people it's by the word, and it varies a lot. Like in my my Glamorous Histories series, of Noble Family, which is the last book in the series, is set in Antigua, and I hired an Antiguan writer to rewrite all of my dialect. And then to also just read through the story and let me know where there were places where I was getting things culturally wrong, or missed opportunities. Missed opportunities are the big thing that I look for when I'm working with a consultant. Who helped me write the T-38 scene? The T-38 scene is three different people. The first is my father-in-law, who is a Vietnam fighter pilot vet. He helped me with all the plane scenes. The second is Kjell Lindgren, who took me in to look at a T-38. I also found the other thing with the T-38 was that I found a training video online, where they were where they were going through the startup sequence. And so I basically used that as a transcript for the conversations between them. And then the third person is Derek Binkowski, who is a character in the books. His call sign is Wizard, and I killed me because I couldn't use Wizard in the books because I had Mr. Wizard and it was just too confusing. But he's active duty Air Force, does a lot of training, and so also helped me with making sure that I had things that were reasonable. What would you consider a missed opportunity when you're asking a specialist about the manuscript? Well, a great example, actually. I sat down with an astronomer to talk about meteors and meteorites, and things, trying to figure out what things would look like. And she said she was the one who told me about water strikes and how really, really bad they are. And if she had not told me that, I was going to have the meteor hit DC itself instead of into the Chesapeake. And that opportunity of having the planet warm up, like, that was not something I was looking for. Would never have had that if I hadn't had that conversation. So it's that sort of thing with a science consultant. With a for culture, trying to think of an example. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a clean example that's not, and my brain is really just not giving me anything. It's giving me brief memories of going, oh, I can use that, but not actually telling me what I was having a response to when I was thinking about that. Oh, when Elma is in mourning here, knowing that one of the things is the tearing of cloth, so wearing a torn ribbon pinned to clothing to symbolize that, there was something that I would not necessarily have thought of on my own. Just in case people do not know this, I am not Jewish. Would you thought of the Shiva scene or using the Shabbat candles in the power outage scene without an expert? I am not 100% certain on this. So my relationship with Judaism is a little weird in that I had some prior knowledge. Part of the reason Elma is Jewish is because I had some prior knowledge from puppets. Weirdly, oddly, I did 2 different Jewish puppet plays in the same year, designing one, performing in the other. The Dybbuk and Hadassah Purim. Sorry, Esther. There we go. I was like, what is that? My brain is misfiring a little bit there. The story of Esther. So that's one of the reasons I'm like, oh, I already know about Purim. I had to perform the Kaddish prayer. So when we got to the audiobook, I already knew the phonetic pronunciation of it. Hadassah was Esther's Jewish Hebrew name. Oh, good. I was like, so there's some stuff that I already knew because I have a lot of friends prior to these books that are Jewish, and so I think the Shabbat candles probably I would have used, but I'm not certain. The Shiva scene, I'm also, I don't, I cannot remember if that was in my outline before or not. There's a thing in Martian Contingency that I added because one of my readers mentioned it and wished that it were there. And I cannot tell you. But that's a really good example of a missed opportunity because it's such a powerful moment in the book, and it would not have been there if someone who was in culture was not reading along with me and saying, "Hey, here's the thing that I wish was here." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I tend to when I'm thinking about cultural experts, I tend to want to know, thinking about what is joyful. Those those are moments we as writers we tend to lean into the pain, but the joyful moments are, I think, a lot of times tell you more about a people. I really appreciate how you talk about mental health. I was wondering if you have any advice for writing with anxiety, mental health related things. Yeah. So it depends on your brain. Like, I think one of the really important things to keep in mind is that everybody's brain is wired differently. And even when you're talking to someone else who has anxiety, or if you have ADHD and someone else has ADHD, you're going to have overlapping things, but it's not going to be, your brains are still not the same brain. You have a bunch of different lived experience and a bunch of other things that have caused your ADHD to manifest in however it manifests. So what you do is you just try on a bunch of different things. For me, the tool that I reach for repeatedly is breaking things down into smaller pieces and offloading as much from my brain into list form or out of my brain as I can to reduce the executive function load. Those are the two things that work best for me, consistently. I have a bunch of other things, like I am attempting to learn how to trigger hyperfocus when I want to about the thing that I want to hyperfocus on, and learning how to disengage from it. Like right now, because I'm having some outside stresses, I am aware that I am doing hyperfocus on Instagram Reels that is not healthy, and also is what my brain needs right now because I need an escape. I'm also doing a lot of, I'm binging a house decorating show, Nate and Jeremiah by Design. It's very cozy. It's a married couple and their little girl, and they're designers, and they go in and save people. It's delightful. Oh, okay. So, so within that, I think what the big piece of advice, the reason I started talking about I'm letting myself do that right now, is that what have learned to do is to try to work with my brain instead of against my brain. So for you, think about what your brain does well, how you can maximize that, how you can remove the barriers that get in the way of your brain doing that, how you can remove yourself from environments that are not conducive. And it's like, if working to a timer causes you anxiety, when someone says, "Do you want to do a writing sprint?" say no. It's okay. Don't do the things that don't work for your brain. Don't beat yourself up because writing sprints don't work for you and they work so well for other people. So figuring out like what your brain does well, figuring out what the stumbling blocks are, and trying to create a writing environment that fits you well. How do you feel about Lady Astronaut or even other stories or characters being picked up and written as fan fiction. I think it's great. I am not supposed to read it, and that is something that I sometimes ignore. Someone wrote, this is on, oh my God, this is so good. On AO3, someone has written a Lady Astronaut, Lady Astronaut Universe, Great British Baking Show crossover. It's the Great Martian Baking Show. It gives me so much joy. That one, very easy to read that because that is not something that I will ever get paid to write. Love those. So I don't often read them, but every now and then I will have an assistant let me know that you can read this one because it's definitely not something you're going to write, and it's a lot of fun. I write fan fiction. I have an AO3 account. I actually have two AO3 accounts. One of them is a pseudonym that not even my husband knows. That is sometimes I just, need to do a thing, and I need to do it without anyone knowing that it's me. But I also write it under my own name. I don't know when the last one it's been a while actually since I've written one under my own name. I have a October Day, piece of October Day fanfic, and I have a crossover between Marie Brennan, Lady Trent, the Lady Trent novels, Lady Trent and Phryne Fisher crossover, which I am actually absurdly proud of. So yeah, I have at it. I actually someone is in the Lady Astronaut Club Discord is working on a LARP. And so I just gave them my Aeon timeline so that they can try to fit things into the timeline. The October Day fanfic is on my AO3 account, and that's under my name, Mary Robinette Kowal. Any general recommendations for science fiction books that have come out in the last couple of years and may have slid under our radars? My mind always goes blank when I'm asked this question. And fantasy, science fiction and fantasy books. So when Franny Stands Up, I loved a lot. John Wiswell has a book. It's been getting a lot of buzz, so it probably has not slid under the radar, but Someone to Make a Home In. I think that's the right name. Oh, look, someone has already pasted the archive of my account in there. Someone you can build a nest in. So we do a roundup on my website of books that I recommend. But one of the other things is that on bookshop.org, I have a little storefronty thing, /Mary Robinette, or probably, I should know this. I think we link to it from my website, but we put the books that I'm recommending up on that. So you can just scroll through. Oh, this is why people ask me, recommend a book. I'm like, books aren't real. They don't exist. None of them have titles. What are you talking about? Thank you, Meg, for pasting in bookshop.org/shop/Mary Robinette. Yeah, that has a bunch of stuff that I'm like, this is good. People should read this. And I'm completely blanking on every name. Part of it, the problem also is that I am often reading books that have not yet come out because I'm reading to blurb. And so I'm like, is this book out? I don't know if this book is out. When did it come out? What year? I have no idea. Time is not real. It's all a lie. How do you find the amazing crochet patterns you eventually make? I often will find a designer. Sometimes I find a designer and I get their book and I work, like I'm working through the Linda Scuia book right now. Other times it is just a lot of time on Ravelry going, there's some really, really ugly crochet patterns, a lot of really ugly crochet patterns. And so one of the things that I do is like, ooh, that's lovely. And then I look to see if other people have made it, because sometimes no one else has made it because it is, or there's a lot of people who frogged it. So that's basically it. Linda Scuia, I tend to really like her stuff. What is AO3? Archive of Our Own. It is repository of fan fiction. It's a great community. So basically, whatever it is that you're interested in, it's probably there. Do you have a puppet story you want to tell us? Do I have a puppet story? Do you know that I have a puppet story that I like telling? Some of you have probably heard this. Some of you have not. This is my favorite puppet story. So I was touring with Marionette Theater, the production of Sleeping Beauty. And the thing about marionettes is that you're a good 5 to 10 feet away from your puppets, so if anything goes wrong, you are screwed. This particular show was also pre-recorded, which means that the sound effects, the music, and the dialogue were all on tape. And this was cassette because that's how long ago this was. So that meant if anything went wrong, you could not ad-lib, you were just, like, tape just kept rolling. In this particular show, for reasons that remain unclear to me, they decided that when the witch turns into the old hag, that I had to jump off the marionette bridge and Velcro a cape around her shoulders. So a costume change. These are puppets with strings coming off of every major body part. Normally you just have a separate puppet, but no, costume change. So had to get the cape around her shoulders without hitting any strings, and then I had to Velcro a needle into her hand that was proportionately like the size of a short sword, and then get her out on stage. And so this particular show, I get her out on stage and the needle hits the ground. And I'm like, crap, because this is the scene where Sleeping Beauty is supposed to prick her finger. And about the same time, I realized that I have Velcroed her left hand under her cape. And I'm like, oh. But the right hand is the one that has the Velcro on it. So I think, maybe I can pick it up. There's Velcro on the hand, there's Velcro on the needle. Who knows? So I swoop her down, her skirts are puddled around her. She looks amazing. I'm like, I have to remember this pose. This is fantastic. I'm a really good puppeteer. That is never going to happen. Like, there's no way. So I decide I'm going to stand her up. Her hand is posed like this. I'm going to pretend she's holding the needle, because if it was proportional, you wouldn't be able to see it anyway. So I stand her up, and the needle has Velcroed here. Here. Her remaining hamstring has wrapped around something on her face, so the only movement I now have with this puppet is this. The tape continues to roll. Sleeping Beauty walks on stage and says, "Oh, I've never seen one of those before. It's so long and sharp and beautiful." And the witch says, "Let me show you how to use it." And Sleeping Beauty says, I don't know how to hold it." "Let me show you how to hold it." And then Sleeping Beauty said, "Oh, I've pricked myself." My partner and I, by this point, have lost it. So we are on the marionette bridge going, which is translating down the strings to the puppets, who are both going, which is not helping the situation. So for the remainder of the tour, every time we got to that part of the show, we would look at each other and go, "Let me show you how to hold it." Okay, so puppet question. Okay, there must be mirrors or something that let you see what the puppets are doing from above. No, no, you are looking at the top of their head. It was not with Fred Riley. Oh my God. No, Fred was my second tour partner. How do you know Fred? Fred and I toured Tales of Japan, and then Brer Rabbit. And we also did Between Two Worlds, which was the Dybbuk, which was the Jewish play that I was talking about. So with marionettes, the control, you can feel what the puppet is supposed to, you can feel the puppet through the control. So, and this is marionettes. With marionettes, I knew a blind marionettist, and the reason he was able to perform with a marionette is that the control tells you exactly how the puppet is standing. You can feel the balance of the puppet through the control in your hand. So you know what's going on down there. But you learn that by, in rehearsal, you do have mirrors and you do have a director. or we had mirrors and a director. But a lot of it is just practice and learning. Okay, I can feel the floor, don't drop, because then the puppet's knees go out. Um, oh, Amy! Oh, that Amy. Okay, yes. Yes, Amy and Chuck. I'm just going to do a shout out. If anyone is interested in getting into puppets and you want a low cost way to do this, Peepers Puppets. I don't have one down here. It's kind of like a ring, and it has an eye on either side, and you pop it onto your hand, and then you can have a moving mouth puppet. I usually have one in my bag, and my bag is upstairs. Anyway, they're great, and you should all get one, just to have. Do not, like, if make sure that they're coming from Peepers Puppets. There is please paste a link in, Amy, because there's some knockoffs on Amazon that have googly eyes that are terrible. Googly eyes, you can't focus them. They're crap. But yes. So yeah. So anytime you have a string that wraps on something, you lose the movement of that puppet with a marionette. This particular set, again, reasons that remain, I don't understand what was happening. The person who designed the set and the puppets was a marionettist. They know better. They bejeweled everything. And I realized that there are some stereotypes around gay men. And also, he bejeweled everything. And so the puppets would just tie themselves to the set constantly. So we had scissors on the bridge with us, and we would just have to cut strings because sometimes you couldn't get free. It was like, he really, like, everything, just everything was bedazzled. It was amazing. And the puppets would, like, stick to themselves, stick to the set, stick to each other. It was phenomenal. And he had been doing marionettes significantly longer than I have. This is why I'm like, this remains unclear. Why would you do that? Sorry. Still bitter. 30 years later. So peeperspuppets.com. Yeah. All right. I do not see any other questions. Going once. Okay. So we are going to be doing more of these. We're about to start reading the Faded Sky in the book club. And the questions are going to be rolling out. Faded Sky questions are going to be rolling out. And we're going to be doing another one of these where I will answer all of your Faded Sky questions. And thank you so much for joining me. This was a lot of fun for me.